Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. This time, we're going to do one that's really helpful for all you new UPSC aspirants out there, tackling that post-independence India chapter. But even if you're not studying for exams, stick around, because today's topic is super interesting for anyone who wants to know how India's map evolved over time. Oh, and before we dive in, a quick reminder to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future deep dives. All right, so let's get started. Imagine India's map looking completely different from what we see today.
Yeah, pretty wild, right?
Yeah, that's where we're headed, folks, back to the time just after independence. The nation was brand new and figuring out how to manage its incredible diversity and create a system of governance that, actually worked.
It was a monumental task.
Definitely. And one of the things that surprised you is that states were categorized into four different types.
4.
Yes. Part A, Part B, C, and even a Part D.
It might seem strange now, but that categorization was a direct legacy of the British Raj. With all those princely states, provinces, and territories they left behind.
Okay, so let's break down those categories. Part A states, those are the big names we're all familiar with, Bombay, Madras, and so on. Then we had Part B states, which included some interesting cases like Hyderabad. Actually, speaking of Hyderabad, its integration into India was a pretty significant event.
Absolutely. Hyderabad's accession involved a lot of political maneuvering and ultimately even a police action. It really highlights the challenges of unifying a nation with such diverse political entities.
For sure. Maybe that's a deep dive for another day. But for now, let's move on to Part C states, a real mixed bag. From Delhi as we know it today to places like Kutch and Coorg.
Yeah, those were often areas that were previously princely states or directly administered by the British, each with its own unique administrative structure and relationship with the central government.
And finally, way out in the Bay of Bengal, we had the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, categorized as Part D. So this initial setup was a reflection of the challenges a newly independent India faced in creating a cohesive nation. But it was far from perfect. Just a few years later, in 1956, a major shift happened. The States Reorganization Act.
Oh, yeah, the 1956 Act, that was huge.
It wasn't just about shuffling boundaries. It was a response to a growing demand, particularly from South India, to redraw the map based on a pretty fundamental principle: language.
Right. The 1956 Act was a pivotal moment in India's post-independence history. It acknowledged the power of linguistic and cultural identity in shaping a nation and how it's governed.
It was like saying, hey, people's languages and cultures matter when it comes to how they're represented and governed.
Exactly. It was a direct response to the aspirations of various linguistic groups who felt that their cultural identities were better served by having their own states.
Which makes sense when you think about it. But here's the thing. Before this act, there was a commission, the our commission, and they had actually rejected language as a basis for dividing states.
Oh, that's right. They were more focused on making sure states could actually function, be financially stable and govern themselves effectively. They were also really concerned about protecting tribal rights, their lands, and their cultural practices.
So they were thinking more about maintaining unity and stability in this brand new nation, rather than, potentially creating divisions along linguistic lines.
Exactly. But public pressure, especially after the death of Patti Shramamulu, who tragically fasted to demand a separate Telugu-speaking state, well, that made it clear that language couldn't be ignored.
Wow, so his sacrifice really changed the course of history.
It did. Shramamulu's death became a rallying cry for the linguistic states movement. It forced the government to rethink its position and led to the formation of the States Reorganization Commission. And that commission paved the way for the 1956 Act.
Wow, that's powerful. So with that act, we saw the birth of some states we know today, right? Like Andhra Pradesh, the very first state created on a linguistic basis.
Precisely. Andhra Pradesh set a precedent and kind of opened the floodgates. After that, we saw the creation of other states based on linguistic identities, leading to a major reshaping of the Indian map. We also saw the creation of states like Kerala, Bombay, which would later be divided, and Mysore, all reflecting this new focus on recognizing linguistic and cultural identities within a unified nation.
So it was a huge turning point, but it wasn't the end of the story, was it?
Right.
India's map kept evolving even after 1956 with the creation of more states and union territories. It's like the map was a puzzle constantly being reshaped.
You got it. The reorganization of states is a continuous process. It's like a mirror reflecting the dynamism of India's social and political landscape.
A constantly shifting landscape, for
Yeah.
sure. It really is. And speaking of reshaping, we can't forget about those commissions. They played a big role in guiding this whole process.
Oh, absolutely.
They were like architects studying the existing setup, considering different blueprints, and then recommending how to redraw the map. I think their insights are super valuable, especially for our UPSC aspirants who need to understand the reasons behind those big decisions.
For sure. Each commission brought its own perspective, reflecting the political and social climate of their time. It's really fascinating to examine their recommendations. You get a glimpse into how the thinking behind shaping the nation evolved.
Okay, so let's rewind back to 1948, right after independence. We talked about the Dar Commission and their cautious approach, prioritizing administrative viability and unity over linguistic states. Why do you think they put so much emphasis on those factors?
Well, remember, the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947 was a really traumatic event. In those early years, the focus was on consolidating the nation, ensuring stability, and preventing further fragmentation. I think the Dar Commission's recommendations reflect that anxiety, that concern about potential divisions along linguistic lines.
Right. They were worried that prioritizing language could undermine the hard-won unity of the newly independent nation.
Exactly. It was a delicate balance.
That makes a lot of sense. It was a time of huge uncertainty and sensitivity. But then that same year, we have the JVP committee with big names like Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel, and they basically echoed those concerns. They seemed to be advocating for a slow and steady approach to reorganization.
Yeah, they were definitely cautious. The JVP committee, while acknowledging the importance of linguistic and cultural identities, they really stressed the need for national security, unity, and economic prosperity. They were worried about redrawing boundaries too quickly, thinking it could lead to instability and hinder the nation's progress.
So it was like they were saying, let's get the foundation right before we start rearranging the furniture.
Mm.
But then the story takes another turn, right? A few years later, in 1953, the Fazl Ali Commission, also known as the States Reorganization Commission, takes center stage. And this time language becomes part of the equation. What caused this shift in thinking?
Well, by then, the linguistic states movement had gained a lot of momentum. The Fazl Ali Commission recognized that ignoring those aspirations could lead to unrest and instability. So they proposed a more balanced approach, accepting language as one factor among others in determining state boundaries.
So they weren't dismissing language outright.
No, they weren't. They emphasized the need to balance linguistic and cultural identities with administrative viability, financial considerations, and the overall goal of national unity.
It was about finding that middle ground, acknowledging the power of language while making sure the nation didn't break apart along those lines. Their recommendations were really important, right? They basically set the stage for the landmark 1956 States Reorganization Act.
Absolutely. The Fazl Ali Commission's report was crucial in shaping the 1956 Act. It provided a framework for balancing the competing demands of linguistic groups, administrative efficiency, and national integration. It was a significant shift from the earlier commissions, showing that the government was willing to accommodate linguistic aspirations within a unified India.
It's amazing how the thinking on this complex issue changed over time. And it highlights something important for our UPSC aspirants. Understanding the historical context and the reasons behind big decisions is key to mastering that post-independence India chapter.
Couldn't agree more. History isn't just about memorizing dates and events. It's about understanding the complexities, the debates, and the motivations that shape those events.
Right. It's about seeing the bigger picture. Now, the 1956 Act was a huge turning point, but as we already mentioned, it wasn't the end of the story. India's map kept changing even after that. It's a testament to how dynamic the nation is constantly adapting to the changing aspirations of his people.
Exactly. Reorganizing states is an ongoing process. It reflects the evolving needs and aspirations of diverse communities within India. And even today, in 2024, we see demands for new states showing that this chapter of Indian history is far from over.
It's like a living map, constantly being redrawn and reinterpreted. So let's shift our focus to the present day and explore some of these ongoing demands for statehood.
Sure. One prominent example is the demand to divide Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state. There are proposals to create smaller, more manageable states like Purvanchal Paschim Pradesh, Bundelkhand, and Awadh Pradesh, each with its own distinct cultural and economic identity.
UP has always been a political and cultural melting pot, so it's not surprising that these demands are gaining traction. What other demands are making headlines?
Well, in western Rajasthan, there's a movement for Maru Pradesh, a state that would cover areas with a shared cultural and linguistic heritage, distinct from the rest of the state.
Oh, interesting. And of course, we can't forget The demand for a separate Vidarbha state in eastern Maharashtra. That movement's been going on for a long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. The demand for Vidarbha comes from a feeling of economic and political marginalization. People there argue that the region would be better off with its own administrative structure and control over its resources.
It makes sense. I mean, these demands often reflect a desire for more regional autonomy, a belief that smaller states can be more responsive to local needs and aspirations. And these are just a few examples. We also have demands for Gorkhaland in West Bengal, Bodoland in Assam, and many others. Each one represents a unique set of historical grievances, cultural identities, and socioeconomic aspirations.
Right, it really highlights the fact that India's political landscape is not fixed. It's a dynamic system constantly responding to the evolving demands of its diverse population.
It's almost as if India's map is a living tapestry woven with threads of language, culture, politics, and the ongoing quest for a governance system that truly represents its people. It's a complex and fascinating story, especially for our UPSC aspirants who are trying to understand this crucial chapter in India's post-independence journey.
Absolutely. Understanding this historical evolution isn't just about memorizing facts and dates. It's about grasping the underlying dynamic, the motivations of different groups, and the challenges of balancing regional aspirations with national unity.
So let's recap the key takeaways for our listeners. India's map, the one we see today, isn't just a static image. It's the result of a dynamic process shaped by language, culture, politics, and the constant pursuit of effective governance. And this process is still happening, as we can see from the current demands for new states. It really shows what a vibrant democracy India is, where communities continue to voice their aspirations and seek greater autonomy.
And that's what makes studying this chapter so fascinating. It makes us think critically about how India's federal structure has changed over time and how it continues to adapt to the changing needs and aspirations of its people.
This deep dive has definitely given me a new perspective on India's post-independence journey. And for our listeners who want to learn more, I encourage you to look into the specific cases we've discussed. The stories of Padishwaramalu, the integration of Hyderabad, the formation of Andhra Pradesh, the demands for Vidarbha and Gorkhaland, and so many others. Each one offers a glimpse into the complexities of India's political evolution.
For sure. Remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped the present and will continue to shape the future. And maybe it's about using that understanding to participate in informed discussions and help create a future that reflects the hopes and dreams of all Indians.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I have one last thought-provoking question for everyone to think about. What might India's map look like 50 years from now? What factors will drive those changes? Will language still be the main force, or will new dynamics emerge? It's definitely something to consider. And as always, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on future deep dives. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brains buzzing.